Afternoon, and welcome back to KW Property Management Consulting's Community Association Best Practices monthly webinar series. I'm your host, Tim O'Keefe, an Executive Director and Partner with KW Property Management Consulting. Since we last met on November 18th, we celebrated a national holiday. We got confirmation that Joe Biden will be our 46th President of the United States. We've seen a surge in coronavirus cases, and the first shipment of vaccines have started rolling out through the country. A friend of mine that runs a large emergency room in Kentucky received his vaccination yesterday, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. And since last month, we've likely all received a bunch of packages from Amazon that we don't need. The CDC has warned against large gatherings over the holidays, which is very difficult to do. Families enjoy this time together and sharing in special holiday moments. But we have to all be prudent about large gatherings this holiday season. It's been 289 days since the first COVID case was confirmed in Florida. As of today, Florida has reported 1.14 million cases along with 20,000 deaths. The U.S. has now had 16.6 million reported cases and more than 300,000 deaths. That is almost 23% of cases, 18% of all deaths around the world. The FDA has moved quickly to approve the Pfizer vaccine that is tested to be 95% effective against the virus. But with any good news, there's some caution to be aware of. Several government organizations have warned against scammers promising access to vaccines for your passwords and personal information. So as a rule of thumb, if you're being asked to give personal information in exchange for a vaccine from someone you don't know, check with your doctor or a credible source. News today reports that Congress is very close to passing a $900 billion COVID relief deal. So help is on the way for many Americans that need this support. On last month's webinar, we had the Florida Ombudsman, Spencer Henning, on the program. Spencer shared his vision for the Ombudsman Office and how to ensure proper elections in community associations. We actually did have some listeners last month contact the Ombudsman Office and ask for assistance for their upcoming elections. As we get started today, please take note of our poll questions. You should be able to see a number of questions that you can answer. Throughout today's webinar, we will share the poll results. Today, we want to discuss lessons learned in 2020. Many of us are looking forward to putting 2020 in our rearview mirrors and looking to the road ahead in 2021. We have much to cover, so let me introduce our panelists and jump right into our discussion. First, we have Ken Direktor. Ken is with Becker Lawyers and serves as the chair of Becker's Community Association practice, which includes more than 40 attorneys around the state. Ken is a return panelist to our program. He always brings a great perspective and knowledge to our discussions. Welcome back, Ken.
Thank you, Tim.
Steve Powell is the board president of an 802-unit association in Key Biscayne, and he serves as the treasurer of his condo association. Steve has also spent his career as an entrepreneur building an international business. We are privileged to have Steve join us once again. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, Tim.
And Robert White is the co-founder and managing director of KW. He's the W of KW. Robert started his career as a CPA, working for a large accounting firm before founding KW 17 years ago. Robert can share a common sense approach to all aspects of property management. Welcome back, Robert.
Thank you.
Since we're looking back at 2020, there are many lessons learned this past year. Many of them have been positive lessons. We've seen amazing resiliency in community associations. So Robert, let me start with you if I could. When we did first hear about COVID-19, we started planning for KW. Like when did you as a leader of the company decide that this thing that's happening in China really needs to be addressed? Let's start planning for it, even though it may have been before the rest of the world started accepting it in the US.
We first heard about it in February. As a company and as a country, I think we really started to take it seriously in the beginning of March. What we did as a company in March is we got our attorney involved. And the reason we got the attorney involved is because the cities, the counties, the states, that we operate in all had slightly different rules about how things were rolling out. So we started a meeting daily with our operations team and with our attorney to go over what the rules were and how to handle the rules, and then with the operations team, how to handle all the things that relate to COVID, whether it be janitorial cleaning or whether it be obtaining masks for our employees. Just all the steps and procedures that we put in place. We started in the beginning of March, and really we had daily meetings, I would say, until June. And we still have those meetings today, except they're weekly now because the rules aren't changing as much.
And how did that benefit our clients, Robert?
It benefited our clients because, number one, we made sure that all the properties that are in different counties and cities were complying with the regulations that each county and city was putting out, and state. And it also gave the board a level of knowledge that we obtained as a group by coming together, meeting, and coming up with what I would call our best practices. And we started to implement that with not only our employees, but with the boards as the time went on.
And Ken, attorneys become experts on every field there is in property management. So when Becker realized this virus was something to be contended with, what measures did your firm take to help support all of the clients that you have around the state?
Well, we like to be proactive, and much as Robert's description of what KW did to get out ahead of this, we did much the same. Let's face it, community associations have not dealt with anything like this. Our society has seen pandemics in the past, but I don't think we've ever seen anything hit the community association sphere the way this did. And we immediately began to develop a separate page on our website and populate it with information with regard to rulemaking, with regard to emergency powers, which I know we'll be discussing today. We began to populate it with information about force majeure clauses in construction contracts, which most people have spent their whole lives viewing as boilerplate, but suddenly had some impact. So our goal was to get out front of it and begin to educate our clients regarding what this meant to them and what the advent of a state of emergency meant in terms of the board's authority to take steps to protect the residents.
And Steve, you have the responsibility for a large community with multiple pools, restaurants, fitness center, and more amenities. As a business guy, you certainly understand the importance of emergency responses. So how did you use your business experience to address these issues with your community when you were faced with COVID virus spreading inside your property?
You know, that's a great question. By the way, we are getting a little echo, so if anybody could hit their mute, their mute button if you're not speaking. But you know, it's interesting, Tim. Business guy or no business guy, I don't think we were prepared for this. You know, I think we were in completely uncharted territory. As Ken said, you know, we've dealt with pandemics. Yeah, the medical community's dealt with pandemics. I don't think any of us have dealt with anything close to this. And that became a real problem for us. You know, as the government, as I said, things were changing so quickly every day. And we started to set protocols in place based on what we were being told from yesterday, only to find out at the end of the next day that there was even a more strict protocol that needed to be followed. And it was very interesting being a larger community. We're 54 acres. I've got many different associations. I've got many different amenities. And I was all too quickly reminded by a number of our residents that we're private property and government can't tell us to shut down the pools and can't tell us to shut down the tennis courts. That was probably only worked for a couple of days until I was on the phone with the police chief and fire chief of Key Biscayne. And I said to him, I said, okay, I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You're asking me to shut my pools down. And they said, no, we're not asking, we're telling you. And at that point, business or no business, it was, you know, game over. We've got to get serious about this direction that we're getting because things were changing so quickly. We had so many things and so many people to address. So it was uncharted territory and very interesting to say the least. But we eventually got everything shut down. Listen, in 2-3 weeks, the entire United States shut down like nothing we've ever experienced in our lifetime.
And so, Ken, there are all these executive orders that were coming out daily, sometimes multiple times in a day. How did you help educate the board members, and what did we learn from all of that, like from even a go forward standpoint, to make sure people were complying, using business judgment rules? What did we learn about the board's ability to make decisions during a pandemic?
Well, we learned that people believe what they want to believe, and they read into what's going on what they want to see. Steve just alluded to the town saying you're directed to close your pools. Tim, you and I did a webinar, I don't know, it seems like years ago. It was like 6-7 months ago. I'm sure you remember. We had the fire chief, the police chief, and a town council member from the town of Palm Beach. And one of the things that we made clear in that webinar, and this is an important split between what the owners perceive and what the board members perceive. And I want to say I was very pleased to see over the course of this pandemic that with almost no exceptions, the board members did not politicize the virus. They did what they thought was right to protect their staff and their residents, and they put life safety first. So as far as the government orders that were coming out, there was a perception, and I want to emphasize a misperception, that the government orders basically defined what the board could do. And that's not correct. Tim, you'll remember at the webinar we did, the public safety the head of the Public Safety Commission from the town of Palm Beach, who was with us at that webinar, said the government orders are the floor, not the ceiling. That the rules that are made for each community have to be based upon the demographic, the risk factors. Do you have a service elevator? Do you have adequate space on the pool deck? Do you have a way to allow contractors or housekeepers or guests or family members to come and go? Do you have the resources to take temperatures? This became a process where the boards, and again, with very limited exceptions and with appropriate due diligence and deference to their fiduciary duties, started to implement restrictions based upon, first, the government orders that came out, but also, more importantly, based upon the specific needs of their community. And I was very pleased at the response, and it has been an ongoing balancing act ever since.
And so, Ken, what did we learn about this as far as the responsibility of the board?
Well, a lot of boards do things that they claim are an emergency. Often it's not. Often, it's like all of us have had a secretary that had that little sign at the desk that said, "Your failure to plan is not my emergency." Most of us in business have seen that from our support staff. But this was a legitimate life safety threat. So what we learned about emergency powers is that when there is a state of emergency and the board has the prerogative to exercise emergency powers, they can do things that they normally couldn't do in the interest of life safety. And the obvious examples that we've all experienced are saying you can't do unit renovations and have contractors come in. Mm-hmm. Or we're only going to allow one at a time, and we're going to have strict protocols on where they can come in and where they go out of the building. We're going to close the pool, or we're going to restrict occupancy at the pool. We're going to close, the most obvious, the gym. Or we're going to require sign-up sheets, and we're going to clean between people coming in. We have a lot of issues with quarantine, and we still have issues with quarantine because we have people who have tested positive, and the people who live with them are not always observing quarantine. And of course, the biggest issue of all is put on a face mask when you walk out of your unit and you're in the hallways or in the common elements or around the staff. So the board has been able to implement all these things. And I'll give you just a more specific example, Tim. Several months ago, the governor for the state of Florida said no more fines for violations of the local orders. You'll remember those because the local orders may have required face masks and empowered fines. A lot of boards thought that they could not impose fines for people who didn't adhere to the face covering policies on the condo property. That was incorrect. There's a difference between not wearing a face mask out in public where a government order requires you to, but where you have a rule in place at your condo that requires people to put on a face covering when they're outside their unit. If it's been properly adopted, it's a perfectly enforceable rule. And if there's a violation, you can fine for it, and you have, of course, all the other legal remedies.
Ken, just to jump in real quick, we actually passed that resolution last Monday. And here we are 9 months in, and we're passing a resolution like this. It had just gotten, I think there was a false sense of security that has developed over time. You call it a false sense of security, or I'm just tired of following protocol, that people were just not adhering to that simple request. And I'll tell you,
you're right. And to tag on to what I just said, part of what created that false sense of security and that inertia to start to ignore the safety guidelines was when the government started to allow and encourage reopening. That created a sense with people that's okay, everything's clear.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about, when we started the emergency orders, one of the most difficult ones for us to enforce was the one of visitors, to not allow visitors or try and limit visitors, because people say, well, you can't keep somebody coming to my unit. Well, in some respects, they're right, but then we can certainly prevent them from using the amenities. We can, because the amenities were closed, but that was probably one of the most difficult. You couldn't have your cleaning lady, you couldn't have your house person or whatever come, and that was a difficult one to enforce.
And the answer, just to be clear, is yes, you can prevent those people from accessing the property, but you need to do so in a way that makes sense based upon the configuration of your property and the individual needs. For example, there's a difference between a high-rise building and a detached single-family home community.
Well, Robert, what was the most important thing that we needed to do in the early stages of the transmission of the virus, as far as, with employees, with board members, with owners? You're on mute, Robert. You have to unmute yourself.
I was trying to prevent the echo. Okay, I would say educating our employees was the first step, as far as wearing masks, as far as cleaning protocol, and then educating the board. I'm not going to go over exactly what Ken and Steve just so eloquently said, but from our perspective, a management perspective relating to those topics, it was, how do we address the people that are upset about these newfound rules or these closed amenities? And how do we do it with a hospitality touch and feel, trying not to upset them and try to alleviate some of the pressure that was being built up on the board? So I would say educating our employees both on the cleaning protocol, self mask wearing and keeping a distance, and then assisting the boards.
Robert, in our situation, we have 6 different residential associations. We happen to be managed by KW, one of our buildings, but the others are by competition, and a couple of them are self-managed. When it came to communicating a common message, that became a real challenge. And I do applaud KW for how you guys got out in front of this and were very communicative to us. And that was a resource for us through this process.
And Steve, does that sound right? Were there actually owners that didn't want to follow the rules?
Please.
Is that a question?
Please. Yeah. Not that was a problem here. Not in Miami-Dade. Not a problem.
Tim, between the 4 people on the phone, you probably have 100 years worth of experience in community associations. There are a third of the people in every condo that we work with wouldn't agree if you said today's Wednesday. So come on.
Listen, I can assure you I got 10 years worth of experience in the last year.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So, Ken, the pandemic created a great deal of fear in people, but community associations had to continue operating. So how did boards use technology to help them run their association business more effectively?
Well, over the years, we've all dealt with associations where the board is a little closed off, others where the board is transparent. If ever there was a time when boards learned the value of openness and transparency, this was it. Because you needed to meet regularly to evaluate the evolution of the virus. You needed to keep amending and evolving your rules to address the changes and the ebbs and flows of the virus. And we have so many more communities now using this format to have people attend meetings. And I'd like to think that this use of technology, whether it be online voting or delivering notices by email, that this technology is now here to stay, because people have learned that it has a tremendous value, because facilitating unit owner attendance and participation is is really what it takes to run an association and quell some of the natural mistrust or resentment. Because as long as you're open, you remove the excuse for people to think things are happening behind the scenes. And I want to point out that for the community associations that are listening in, the law allows you to adopt a resolution. Now, the board has to adopt a resolution for this. The law allows the board to adopt a resolution that allows owners and proxy holders to attend membership meetings and count toward a quorum and voice vote by using this kind of a technology. So if we were having a membership meeting and you had 80 people at your condo on this call and the board has adopted this resolution, those people can count toward a quorum. And if they haven't voted online or sent in a limited proxy, obviously this wouldn't work for a board election in a condo or co-op. But for all other votes, if you adopt this resolution, those people on the Zoom call can voice vote.
Ken, I'm going to jump in. I have to ask this question because it was a real problem for us. We're not unique as a condominium. We've got board members that span the spectrum of age. Some are very technology literate, others are not. I had a hell of a problem. I wanted to run all the meetings, and I did ultimately run all the meetings on Zoom until our election. In our election, we did hold in person, which is a whole nother subject. But where are we on a state level with being able to actually have an election electronically? Because I don't think we can. And in my particular situation, I have many international residents. I'm probably only 55% occupied at any one time. And just the whole process of getting a budget approved where I had to send them out, which we did. We mailed them out 14 days early. We were trying to run board elections. I mean, it was a real problem. Where is the state on this? Is the state moving forward to give us some technology support, or adoption?
It's already happened, Steve. The state allows, let me give you a couple pieces of technology that are already available and have been available for a few years. Number one, if the owners sign a written consent, you can send them official notices by email. So for the vast majority of us in our society who have spent the last 25 or 30 years in front of one of these computers, who want to get our mail like that, instead of at the pace that the post office delivers it. And quite frankly, we've all seen annual meetings where people say, I just got my ballot yesterday, I won't have time to vote. Using email eliminates that problem. So that's on the notice end, there's the technology already there. You just need to implement it and collect the consents. The other thing that has been on the books for 3 years now is online voting. The board can adopt a resolution to implement online voting. It's not mandatory. You don't have to use it in every vote. And the owners who still want to attend the meeting or mail in their ballots or mail in their limited proxy or scan it or fax it, they can still do so. But by creating online voting, you put a link in the notice of the meeting. And since the notice is being sent to you in most cases by email, you click on the link, you go to the website, you register. The only person who can register is the person with your email address, which is provided by the association. And then you vote and you're done. So that technology exists.
I'm a very proud man, and thank you very much, because you helped me on this panel. And the reality is, our council did not give us that advice.
Well, I'm not here to impugn anyone, but I would recommend to your association, collect the consents to send notice by email. Your manager will love you for it, because it means when he sends out a notice to all those people, he takes a PDF, he drags it to a preset group email and hits send. And he's just saved countless hours of photocopying and stuffing envelopes and postage. Number two, adopt a resolution to implement online voting. Number three, adopt a resolution to allow your members to attend meetings through remote communications. I'm sorry, Tim, for going on so long, but one last comment to you, Steve. Every community has people who are technology challenged, but I'd ask you all to think about who the buyers are in your community. It is unlikely that you have a lot of new buyers who are 85 or 90 years old. Most of your new buyers are my age, early 60s or younger or within that range. And they're people who want technology, who want the most efficiently run operation. And that means the use of technology to facilitate participation.
Thank you.
Robert, let me turn to you on technology. What technology package do you think that KW offered that was already existing that board members or clients were able to take advantage of to help move through this COVID scenario from a communication standpoint, board meetings, et cetera? You're muted, Robert.
The obvious two are Zoom and Teams. We've kind of adopted both. I can tell you the vast majority of our board meetings now are online and being done through Zoom. I do agree with the group that it has improved participation. I can tell you on a personal note, my wife is the president of our HOA now. And since they moved the meetings from a location, a geographic location, to online, that there's a lot more participation. And I think to take Ken's comments one step further, you've got the voting and stuff that you can do online. But I think what I've seen is real beneficial is that on things that you're not voting on, where you kind of want to get the temperature of the community, it just makes it a lot easier now because there's so many more people participating.
And a lot of these online software products allow you to use a polling feature where you can even take a poll just like we're doing on this call.
And to that point, Ken, I'll give you some poll results based on what we've asked so far. 75% of board members viewed this year as a challenge to overcome. 88% are using new technology to conduct board meetings, while 63% are considering moving elections to online. So maybe it's 64% because Steve's now on that, going to vote for that. So
necessity is the mother of invention, is it not?
Yes, exactly. And that's really, for me, that's a lot of what the 2020 is all about, is necessity is the mother of invention. And we've learned that we can do things more efficiently. And it's great because we have seen a big uptick in the participation in board meetings because we're making it easier. You don't have to come into the room, or there's many people that are gone during different times of the year, but they still want to stay connected to the community. So now they can do that through these board meetings that are on Zoom, which is fantastic because look, a lot of board members don't want to be board members forever. The more people in your community you can get involved in the community, the easier it is to try to convert one of them to a board member one day. So this all makes it easier, and hopefully it just gets a few more people that want to be leaders in the community to run for the board then and share some of the responsibility then.
Absolutely, all good. It's all good, Tim. I mean, there will always be people in communities who are disagreeable, but the best way to get to a peaceful, harmonious community is by facilitating participation and by operating transparently.
Absolutely. So Steve, how did, we may have already talked about this some, but how did you tackle the day-to-day operations of being a board member once your community went on lockdown?
It was interesting. This is a volunteer position. It very quickly became a very questionable volunteer position. It went from, thinking I would spend an hour or two a week to I would say, a good 20, 30 hours a week. It was almost daily. Daily, I was sitting with the general manager here as we were going through and kind of troubleshooting. We also had a lot of employees. We have 100 and some employees. So we were trying to think how to deal with this. I mean, what do you do for your employees when you're shutting down the amenities which they worked in? And the community was coming out and saying, listen, we want to try and take care of our people. So you really had a lot of balancing that you were trying to do between the different constituents. And you guys all know, in condominiums, there's no shortage of opinions. You don't have to look very far, but it was a day-to-day. And probably the best thing, and as you know, Tim, I commute to New York week on, week off until the pandemic. So luckily I was here. It didn't matter. I wasn't traveling, so I was able to be here. And I think that's the case with a lot of board members. We just weren't going into our office, so we were certainly more accessible. And everything you guys have said with regards to technology. I mean, we had our winter residents that would normally not participate in summer meetings. They were all on board meetings. We could actually organize the board much easier now because of technology and because everybody wasn't going anyplace. So decisions were, pretty quick, pretty fluid, and we were able to stay on top of it. Probably, pretty successfully.
And to that point, Steve, 88% of our listeners today have said that they've seen fewer snowbirds this year. So
they've seen fewer snowbirds?
Right.
You know, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that was our case here. Our snowbirds stayed longer, and they're also and they've started coming back, you know, just as regularly. You know, and also in your market area, in our broadcast area here, we're all seeing an influx from the Northeast. We're all seeing sales increase. You know, we've seen it within our community. Prices are up, transaction activity's up, and that's people coming from the Northeast. These are snowbirds that are looking at making this a more permanent residence. We're also experiencing demand at our schools that we were never experiencing before. So it's been very interesting how this has played out in different elements of our economy and how it's affected our buildings. You know, when you think about it, think about, you know, I'll go there. The toilet paper situation. There wasn't any toilet paper. We were all out, right? But there was an industrial surplus because we weren't going to restaurants and we weren't going to the office buildings. So what did we do? We did something similar to a lot of other associations. We started buying industrial boxes of toilet paper and started handing them out. But, you know, not to digress, but these were just some of the things that we experienced during this process.
So you went from double ply to single ply toilet paper.
Yeah, it was.
So Ken, you know, it's been 9 months. How restrictive are you seeing properties be today in reopening their amenities?
Well, I think Robert touched on it earlier, as did Steve, when we talked about this false sense of security and things started to reopen. And I had to explain to a lot of my clients that this reopening is reopening of businesses, where if you choose to go, that's up to you. If you choose to expose yourself to an environment outside the safety of your home. But I have never taken the position that that meant that you needed to reopen the pool or you needed to reopen the gym. Because if you reopen your property and allow contractors and housekeepers and guests and other people to come and go, your people who live there, that's not a voluntary choice for them to be exposed to that many new people. So I have seen associations back off on their restrictions late in the summer as the reopening of Florida commenced. But I've also seen a lot of talk with the resurgence of the virus about closing off guest access to the amenities, about closing the gym, about refusing to allow discretionary renovation projects to commence. So it really has ebbed and flowed. And I think a lot of boards, most of the boards, I would say, have been fairly diligent about keeping track of the positivity rates and the ebbs and flows of the virus, and they have modified their rules accordingly. It's interesting, and this again goes to the points that Robert and Steve made, that once you start to loosen, it's hard to go back. It's like if you levy an assessment for a project, the last thing you want to do is not have enough money and have to go back and levy another one. Having to close down amenities and then loosen it, it's very difficult to go back, but when life safety is at stake, you have to.
And Ken, what is the responsibility of boards regarding accepting and following professional advice, not just from attorneys, but the CDC? There's, you know, a lot of government agencies that have stipulated their, you know, professional advice. So what's the responsibility of the board in that?
Well, I'll give you the answer in two parts. The first general and the second part specific. Generally speaking, boards benefit from what you referred to earlier, Tim, which is the business judgment rule, which is that when boards make business judgments for their community, a court is unlikely to substitute its judgment for that of the board as long as the board acts reasonably. What does it take to act reasonably? Well, if you're doing a concrete restoration, you don't have a retired lawyer spec out the work. You hire an engineer. In this particular scenario, there was no shortage of data out there from the CDC, from the Department of Health, from the various hospitals, from various other learned sources as to what this virus was and how to protect yourself from it. So again, in the interest of exercising reasonable business judgment while adopting severe restrictions on access to and use of the property, in order to make those restrictions reasonable, you needed to get and rely on expert advice.
So listen to the experts. You don't have to follow it, but listen to it. At least you have to have some judgment in there.
If you don't follow it, you do so at your peril.
Yes. So Robert, let me turn to you and kind of another topic. What has been the most important, like if there's one thing that we had to do as a company better than ever, what would be that most important thing that we've worked on during the pandemic?
I would say communication by far. I mean, getting the information from the attorney to the troops and upper management, and then from upper management down to the on-site employees, and then from upper management also to the board members. There's just a lot of communication, whether it be what rules have changed, what amenities can be closed or should be closed or can open again, to what our cleaning protocol is. So I would say communication has been the number one topic at KW. And I think that the pandemic is going to improve our company long term, because I think that we've opened lines of communication and we've set meetings and ways of transferring that communication that are going to last past the virus. So I mean, we always talk about all the bad in 2020. You try to find some good in it. And I think that's some good. I think our company will be improved going forward.
So Steve, how's your association adopted new methods of communicating, and why was that important?
I think we've touched on it really. It was really through Zoom that we have stayed much more in touch. And even as we have board members traveling, I think the frequency was much greater. It wasn't terribly complicated, luckily, and it was probably a great time for Zoom, and then also Microsoft Teams to release their product. What we saw, and this goes into the retail industry as well as technology, we saw things advance, in years and within days. What happened in the retail industry happened in 30 days, which would have taken 5 years. And I think it was the same thing with the adoption of the different technologies. We were desperate. We were desperate for ways to stay connected. And if it wasn't for these types of tools that we're talking about, we wouldn't have been able, us and so much of the population wouldn't have been able to stay connected with their employment. I mean,
Steve,
this tested what our capabilities are from working from home.
You know what I find interesting, Steve? I find interesting that meetings in the past that would normally be conference calls are now Zoom and team meetings. Everybody's doing the video meetings. So even the meetings that don't require the video, I've noticed that everybody's sending out the Zoom and team meetings. So we've really changed not only our communication method, but the platform in which we communicate. Because I was making fun of my partner, Paul, and I had a meeting this morning and it was video. And I'm like, why do you guys need to see me? Why aren't we just doing a conference call? And we were all laughing. So it's unbelievable how this has changed.
There's been a lot of positives that have come from this. And as you talk about the silver lining, the amount of time that we've got to spend with our families, the way we've been able to reimagine our homes, and the amount of travel. I'm the guy who was traveling every week, every other week, and the amount of money that I've saved or the amount of money that I would have spent to go visit a client. It's so real time now, and we can get on the phone and have a more personal, discussion by just putting the visual there, and not just being on a conference call and being able to be distracted on other things. With video, you've got to stay connected.
It's also sped up the ability to meet, because instead of trying to find that date and time where you can physically get together, you like, let's do it tomorrow. Is noon going to work for you all? And people can find that half hour of time to talk, which has sped things up in making decisions too. I think it's been great.
Yeah, the amount of information that's coming out to us right now from different sources, I mean, whether it's related to COVID or just your normal business practices, are so much more because we're able to connect this way.
So Ken, you're used to a lot of in-person events. So how did your firm modify its communication efforts to stay available to your clients?
Well, I want to add that what Robert and Steve just said. One of the things we learned was how to position a camera so you can wear a jacket and a nice shirt, but a pair of pajama pants on the bottom. This was more of an affirmation than a revelation for me, because I have always believed that people appreciate the difference between professionals who are reactive, who wait for you to bring your questions and your problems to them, as opposed to those who are proactive. Proactivity has always been my approach to the practice. We're just now sending out letters to all of our clients with regard to the questions that are going to be coming about the vaccine. And what can we do to inculcate our rules with the vaccine in terms of, can we turn down a tenant who can't prove vaccination? Can we keep out contractors who haven't got proof that they've been vaccinated? This vaccination is a great thing, but it's going to create a whole new host of questions And we're sending out something to all of our clients to get them thinking about it now, because I prefer to be proactive and plant the seed to tell people they need to start thinking about it. So Robert referred to communication, and that is precisely what we have all learned. We have learned that you need to be proactive, that you need to stay informed on what's going on in the virus, that you need to keep your customers, or in my case, my clients, informed, that you need to help them strike a balance, and you need to be nimble so that you can encourage them to be nimble in reacting to the ebbs and flows of the virus.
So let's talk about the vaccine. What are the ramifications of the vaccine, Robert, from a management perspective?
That is a very good question. I'm reluctant to give an answer right now because I think there's a lot more to it than just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. I mean, I could foresee boards not wanting people to come to the property, whether it be vendors or visitors or employees or just whoever it is that are not vaccinated. So prior to getting a good legal understanding, it's probably a better question for Ken than for me. But prior to getting a good legal understanding, KW would be reluctant to take a position on this. I do see many issues out there that could arise as a result of the vaccine and people's expectations of the vaccine. But as far as our stance and what we're going to do, we haven't come to that conclusion yet. We have to learn a little bit more.
And Tim, I agree with Robert. And from a legal perspective, just as you would not offer a management position without knowing the legal, I would not offer a legal perspective until I know the science. If you've been vaccinated, what does that mean for your neighbors, for the staff at your community, for your use of the amenities? Does that mean that you cannot transmit the disease, or does it mean you cannot contract the disease? Does it mean you could still be a carrier? Does it mean you cannot? So I need to learn more from medical science as to what the vaccine means in terms of the protection that it creates for the community. And then we can offer a legal opinion to management and to board members as to how the vaccine should factor into your rulemaking thinking.
And Tim, as it relates to that question, I know there's a lot of board members on this call listening, and I would encourage them as the management company, or even if we don't manage your property, I would encourage you to take the same position, a let's get educated, wait and see position. I would listen to what your homeowners and your other board members have to say, but I would really wait to make a decision. And it would also be something I would have the legal counsel as well as the management company intimately involved in those discussions to make sure whatever game plan the board puts together is one that's on a unified front and one that can be delivered and managed in a positive manner, with hopefully the participation of the homeowners, because you're going to be talking about these things in meetings, which we talked about earlier, how there are more participation in these meetings, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I would encourage the boards to do.
So Steve, you've got, friends who run healthcare companies. Like, when is the vaccine really going to be available to the average Joe like me?
I wish I could tell you that. I really do. I'm listening to a lot of the same reports that you are. And the reality is, I mean, the good thing is we got a second vaccine on the way. That's certainly going to speed things up. But, from everything I hear, which is the same as I think is available to you, it's going to be springtime before, those of us that are not high risk, if you will, have access to it. But I think you got a real issue as Ken and Robert were talking about is, what do you require? When do you require it? How do you require it? How do you make them take it? I mean, the flu shot's been out there for a long time and it's very good. Don't want to draw a direct parallel, but plenty of people don't get the flu shot every year. And I'm sure there's going to be a segment of our population that just for one reason or another doesn't believe that they should have the vaccine. So it's going to be a very interesting road to hoe over the next year on this.
Which is a good point, because I think what we're saying is for boards really shouldn't be, they should wait to see availability and what's out there for the owners, for the employees, before you start making decisions and time-wise what you expect as far as people getting vaccinated. So let's wait. The message, I think, is let's wait. Right now, it's still, with the vaccine's been out for maybe 2 days, so there's still a lot to learn from all of it.
Boards shouldn't play doctors in government. Let's
Police shouldn't play lawyers either in association business.
Yeah, they do that anyways.
So let's move on to different topics, Steve. I want to talk about community civility. And by that, I mean how well neighbors treat each other within a community. One of our poll questions, the answer is 73% of the respondents would not say their community has become friendlier since COVID. So, Steve, you have a lot of international, you do, how do you feel people change in your community and the way they treated each other once the pandemic impacted how we live?
You know, when you were saying this, I was kind of looking up because I'm looking at the buildings that are in our community, and I'm just thinking about who lives over there and who lives over there and how they were behaving. I'll tell you, we have a super international community here, and I think they've all behaved pretty well. I think as time has gone on, though, it's weighed on them. It's weighed on certain residents. And I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm going to distinguish a difference between our community. We have a community that is, you know, from the Northeast or from the North, U.S. domestic population, and then we have a more Latin-oriented community. And I will tell you, you know, demographically speaking, we're a little bit older demographic that's coming from the Northeast, a little bit younger demographic that's coming from the South. But you know, there's extremes on either side of that. And I will tell you that our younger community has had a harder time conforming. And as our snowbirds have come back, their voices have become much louder on compliance. And this was kind of one of the drivers to this resolution that I mentioned a little while ago in having to go ahead and pass something like this, because we clearly had some issues with the younger community, you know, adhering to the protocols. But I would say overall, everybody's kind of come together. This is America at the end of the day, and we're all in this together. And I think everybody, for the most part, has behaved, other than isolated issues here and there.
Ken, what have you seen from overall treatment from board members, owners to tenants? You know, kind of questions that you get from a legal standpoint. What are you seeing?
Well, you know, we've referred, all of us during this conversation, to the concept of balance in the approach to this pandemic. And this is an apropos time to point out that there's also a balance to be struck between the restrictions on access, the restrictions on use of amenities and using the gym or going to the pool, and recognizing that 9 months down the road, there's a psychological issue at work here. I mean, a lot of us have been cloistered at home. There is a concept called COVID fatigue that is out there. And the board, you know, Robert very correctly referred to the value of communication, because when people get frustrated and they feel like they're being denied their rights, you need to start by communicating with them. But I also think that condos and co-ops and HOAs tend to get a bad rap, because most board members truly serve the community, and it's a thankless job under the best of times. And this is not the best of times. Most owners go along and get along. And if the board members gauge the atmosphere in the community based upon the people who show up in disproportionate numbers at board meetings, you do not get an accurate read of what most of the community is thinking. You hear from the people who would argue with you on whether or not today is Wednesday. So I don't think COVID has necessarily magnified that, but the uptick in communication and the more openness of communication may bring in more of the more reasonable-minded people in the communities to the meetings, but you're still going to hear more frequently from the people who aren't. So Robert, go ahead, Tim, I'm sorry.
Robert, what's management been able to do to promote positive messaging and relationships within the community?
I think that it gets back to what we've talked about. I think that the communication of the way the employees are working with the homeowners and how things are being said and how things are being explained. And I think that the extra participation in the meetings have alleviated some of what I would call the tension and allowed us to deliver things in a positive way. For instance, Ken had mentioned before about being proactive and reactive. And I think that if you're a management company and you're behind the 8 ball and you're reacting to situations, I think it comes across much more negative than if you're being proactive, which is why we took such strides to get out in front of this thing and make sure that the messaging that we were giving to the board, the recommendations, the examples that we were giving to the board were being proactive so that it can be discussed and accepted in a positive way, as opposed to being told this is what you need to do and there really wasn't a lot of communication behind it. I think that tends to make the message, number one, more negative, and number two, it tends to bring out the defiance in people. I can speak on behalf of being a homeowner in an HOA. I think that this pandemic and our form of communication that we're using now has actually helped the community. I've seen a lot of tension. There was a group of people in this HOA that created a lot of tension and just bad will, and I've seen it dissipate. And I think a lot of it's because of trying to work together as a team to figure out what to do, the more people participating in the meetings and hearing the information, which makes it appear more transparent, which all along, all these boards, I think I agree with, I think it was Ken that said it before. I think the majority of the boards out there are trying to do what's in the best interest of the community and trying to do what the people elected them to do and do it in a positive manner. There are always these groups. And what I'm saying is I've seen all this, the communication and the technology, and I've seen this kind of alleviate a lot of that and create a more positive environment.
Robert, I think we had kind of the same situation. I think it did stamp down a little bit of the background noise that was going on. And I'll tell you, here was another thing too for us was understanding that the employees are also going through their own problems. We had a number of situations with employees that had COVID affected in their life through, they had childcare problems just like we had childcare problems. It really kind of brought the level to everybody to the same level on trying to deal with this and work through it.
And I think getting out in front of these issues and at least talking about them, like let's talk about an issue right now that's out in front. We just mentioned the vaccine. And I think we all agree that at this point in time, we want to accumulate data. We don't want to make any decisions on it. But I think being proactive and talking about it and getting everybody's input, I think that delivers it in a much more positive way than waiting for it to happen and then saying, okay, here's all the rules we're putting in place. And you know what I mean? I just think that working that way will help and deliver the positive message that you were asking about, Tim.
And it's clear that the pandemic's created some unique challenges, but I've heard many more boards kind of push off making decisions this year. And I don't know if it, has anything to do with what's going on from a national scale and, pushing through getting that last seat filled on the U.S. Supreme Court versus waiting for the next administration to fill that seat. But far more now than I've ever heard before, I'm hearing boards say, well, we're going to put that decision off until the next election and until after the election so the new board can make that decision. So are you seeing this kind of a trend as far as boards delaying decisions on projects, staff, rules, and regulations, or do you think it's business as usual?
Well, I'm going to give you a lawyer's answer to that, which is it depends. And I'll explain what I mean. For the most part, the answer to your question is no. Business continues, the association has to operate, things have to be done. But for example, an association that says you can't have a contractor in your unit to do renovations should not be doing renovations in their lobby and their hallways. Because it makes no sense for the association to say, Robert, you can't renovate your unit, but oh, by the way, we'll be having our decorator and our contractors redoing the floors in the hallways and the lobbies. To me, that's not reasonable. So those sorts of things can and probably should be put off if you want to be consistent. But I am not finding reticence to move forward with looking at the rules beyond COVID rules, looking at the documents beyond COVID issues or emergency power issues. I'm seeing associations continue to move forward. And frankly, the increased use of technology to meet has actually facilitated, as Robert and Steve both pointed out, it was so hard to get people together when they wanted to meet in person, but with the use of technology, it's easier to convene meetings and get things done and make decisions. 40-year certification projects are still going on. Roofs that leak still need to be replaced. Paint that is chalking and peeling still needs to be redone. So I don't think the pandemic has prevented communities from moving forward except where it is judicious for life safety reasons to put things off.
Yeah, and I would agree with Ken. I mean, in our situation, we had just finished a 3-year, $10 million capital improvement project. It came to a close in March, April. And people just said, you know what, we're tired with everything going on. Let's not bring any more construction people on the property. So we didn't take anything in on the common areas. Once we did open up the buildings, for the unit renovations, I mean, yeah, we were a little bit overwhelmed because, as I mentioned, we had more transaction activity this year. So we ended up ultimately, come the fall, with more contractors in the building than we would have preferred to have had. But for the most part, everything kept pushing forward. We didn't push anything off other than capital improvements for the community.
And what we're seeing, Tim, is the projects that are absolutely necessary, those are definitely moving forward. Some of the ones that are optional, those are the ones where maybe people are saying, you know what, we don't want all these extra people on our property. Let's push those off.
And Robert, I said at the beginning of this webinar today that news shows that there's a $900 billion stimulus package that's very close to being passed. So when Congress passed the CARES Act, we got calls from a number of associations wondering if they qualified for any assistance. What did we learn from the CARES Act?
I'm not here to criticize those that created the CARES Act because I know it's a complicated thing to do. Looking back on it, I think that hopefully the new one that comes out will be less reliant on payroll, because really that was the driving force. Just so everybody on this call knows, KW didn't qualify because we're too big of a company to qualify for that initial CARES Act. And we could, what our original plan was before we figured out we couldn't qualify was we'd get the money and then distribute it to the associations based on the payroll. That didn't play out. Hopefully what's going to happen is they'll tinker with the rules. So not only associations, but small businesses that are impacted that maybe aren't so reliant strictly on labor can benefit. In an association standpoint, I would hope that they specifically address this. I know there was a lot of real estate players that came in and brought up issues relating to the dependence on payroll to get the funding. And when you look at it from an association standpoint, if you have a lot of people living within your association and they're not paying because they've lost their job or whatever related to COVID, that's where maybe some new proceeds could come in under the new rules and help those associations, assuming they have the documentation supporting their claims.
And I'm sure you face this question many times. How did you educate your clients on the impact of the CARES Act and community associations?
Well, I have the good fortune of having a Washington, D.C. office, so I get information directly through the pipeline from my folks in D.C. And it's hard to educate your people regarding federal legislation that is adopted on the fly because there's such uneven and inconsistent interpretation and application. For example, there were a lot of associations, most associations could not get PPP loans, and they did not want loans that wouldn't be forgiven. So they didn't apply for them. And then there were other associations that applied and got PPP loans. So I think it was difficult to address the CARES Act from an association perspective because the implementation through the SBA was so uneven and unpredictable.
And so with this new stimulus package that comes out, like none of us know the rules around the dollars and how it's going to be distributed this time. But what advice would you give to associations based on knowing there's going to be another round of stimulus? And how
I think you need to, I actually had a couple of associations get PPP loans, and some of the members were so affronted by the fact their association got money that was intended for struggling businesses that they actually leaned on the board to give the money back. Now, you can all pick it up off the floor, falling down, having actually heard people do that, but it happened in a couple of my communities up in Palm Beach County. I would encourage them to look at their finances. I have not seen a big uptick in accounts receivable through this pandemic. I don't know, Robert, if KW has seen it, but I have not.
I was going to touch on that. I think KW is a little isolated because we tend to have what I would call higher end buildings. And I read an article, I think it was in Fortune magazine, I can't remember, but I read an article recently where they were saying the middle class and up, for the most part, has not been affected. It's been the lower level employees that have been affected. And I would have to imagine the vast majority of people that live in the buildings and the communities that we manage are in that middle class and up. So I would agree with you, Ken. We haven't seen a big uptick in receivables. I kind of went on that little discussion because there might be board members on here that are having problems with receivables. And hopefully that would be the driving factor to determine funding versus the payroll, which if they have a management company, they don't have payroll, or if it's a self-managed building and they only have 1 or 2 employees, that may not be sufficient to cut, you know what I mean? That may be a very small percentage of their budget that they're depending their funding on. So if they did have a big HR issue, that's probably not the best way to roll it out. Like I said, I'm not here to criticize those that created the plan. I'm just saying, hopefully they've learned from some of the loopholes or pitfalls that they had and they fixed that.
And Tim, we're going to need to see what the intended purposes are for this next wave of funds, because it could be for communities in the lower socioeconomic strata where they have had a number of layoffs, where they are having difficulty paying their insurance premiums and paying their utilities. They may qualify if this new law is written differently than the first one was. Again, it's all in the application, and if the application is inconsistent, it's going to be tough to predict. But I guess the advice I would give is when the law comes out, make sure you understand your rights and make sure you understand how your needs correlate with what the law is intended to address.
And that's why it's good to reach out to your attorneys and have that conversation with your attorneys, because the attorneys will be knowledgeable about the distribution of funds. So try to talk to your attorneys about it.
And they are cracking down on businesses that took money that don't qualify or shouldn't have taken money. So you really have to look at your association's finances, see where you've been impacted by COVID. And if you really have, then proceed forward. I do agree with Ken's clients up north that decided to give the money back, and I think maybe part of the reason they did that was because of some of the SBA came out with some rules afterwards, really tightening down the reasons for getting the money. And they were going after people. And I think we've all seen it in the news, the people that they went after that really didn't qualify and still applied for the money and got the money. So it's definitely something I would very seriously consider with the board, as well as with your attorney, and make sure you guys are in a good position that where you warrant getting the funds so that you don't get in any trouble going forward.
Well, and as a company, we've been fortunate. We're considered an essential services company. A lot of the staff that we had, we redeployed to be more in the cleaning side because there's more effort that properties had to be cleaned more frequently. So we needed more people. So we were able to take maybe someone that was a pool attendant and move them into a cleaning role. So we really had very little impact on our business. So very fortunate as the type of company that we are. But the other thing that we did to help our customers is we immediately looked at those 3 categories of associations: those that were underfunded, those that were funded adequately, and those that were nicely funded. And we got a lot of our properties to get signed up for emergency lines of credit. Not that they needed the money yet, but they had the money available in the event that receivables became very difficult and they were going to need to move quickly to get some funds. So we helped our customers in a lot of ways in that regard. I'm going to move on, or Steve, to you. You're a business guy with large company and thousands of employees. What impact have you seen the pandemic have on small businesses, and what is the outlook for more relief?
I'll back up to what you guys were just talking about with the CARES Act, because I'm in the mortgage business. I'm in the mortgage market, both on the residential and commercial. And I was actually on a panel with some people from Washington yesterday about the eviction moratoriums. And when you look at the new money that's coming out in CARES, I don't think the association should be looking towards that money, because I don't think there will be any for us. I don't think that you'll see a version of PPP come back out. They'll be more isolated, I think, on certain industry sectors. But when you look at, what the impact of the pandemic's had on different businesses, it's really cut a cross section. If you were in hospitality, travel, restaurant or anything like that, you've been decimated. And by the way, that's not changing in the next 6 months because of a vaccine. The prospects are that things will get better. But listen, we've lost a third of the restaurants in America. You know, that's not coming back overnight until we figure out a way to recapitalize those businesses, which I don't think is going to happen. I don't think that's part of the plan. But then if you look at the other side of the economy, the stock market, I mean, you're try and explain that. But there are also other parts of real estate. I mean, the multifamily market generally is doing quite well. And as you guys were talking about delinquency on payments, yeah, we saw a little spike. They didn't pay exactly on the date, but they got paid for the most part by the end of the month. The statistics are like 1.8% difference on higher end apartments on what's getting collected from a year ago this month to this month to last month. You know, so it hasn't been that as drastically different as one would assume. But we've seen businesses that are in and around the multifamily space, you know, either condo, either residential, that service that market that are actually doing well. This is going to be one of the highest mortgage volumes in the residential market ever. I mean, ever. I mean, I think that the next highest year was 2003 that we're coming to, and we're setting records that they never envisioned before. And I don't see that slowing down. You know, and a lot of people, I don't think, realize the impact of the Fed lowering the rates. You know, those that can get credit, which are most of your customers and most of your higher end profile of HOAs, you know, this has been a good thing. Their cost of borrowing has gone less. It's cost less to borrow on these condos or these different associations. So, you know, small businesses have definitely suffered, especially here in Florida. We have such a high tourism industry and the hotels. You know, I'm a special servicer in the commercial space. So there's plenty of hotels that I'm dealing with that are in default right now, but it's not the multifamily properties. It's mostly retail and hospitality.
Steve, the only thing I'll touch on there is if you've been watching all the bank CEOs, they're all talking about how checking accounts and saving accounts are at the highest level they've seen in a long time. So there is this sense within probably why the market's kind of moving. There's this sense that once the vaccine is rolled out, that all this savings is going to be like, oh my God, we got to go travel. We got to go here. We got to go buy this. And it's going to get spent. So that I think that's the silver lining in all this, and fingers crossed, hopefully that will bring the economy back. And I know there's a lot of people out there struggling, so we really need something to happen.
Yeah. I mean, go try and get home improvements done or go buy a barbecue. Good luck on that one right now.
Yeah. Plus the inventories levels are so low that when it does come back, all these companies are going to be ramping up inventory, ramping up sales. So hopefully that'll be a good shot to the economy.
Yeah.
So we're at the top of we're beyond the top of the hour, so I want to move to wrapping up. We have some questions from the audience, and some of these are for you, Ken. I'm going to go quickly through these things if we could hit them quickly and move on. Rick in Boynton Beach wants to know, how do you conduct voting online to avoid cheating?
Have an online system that is set up to be secure. I mean, the statute allows online voting, but requires certain security safeguards. Good voting software requires a single source to provide the email addresses for people who can register and vote. And those should be the email addresses that you give to the association.
Hey, Robert, can you text below your belt?
Oh, I'm texting you.
Ken, is there an application? I mean, as I mentioned, we weren't as familiar with the rules. I mean, is there an application that you've seen to host the online voting that you recommend?
Well, this is going to sound self-serving, yeah, but the application is called Becker Ballot. We created, my partner Donna Berger and I worked hard to develop an online voting software about 3 years ago, and it's been on the market for that long. And it has been used hundreds of times, and it has, without exception, increased participation. And we've had no security breaches. It's interesting that we ask questions about security for condo elections. It's hard to imagine somebody wants to be on the condo board so bad that they're willing to hack a third-party software provider, but I guess anything's possible.
So, Ken, Kurt in Fort Lauderdale said, can all documents like association documents, invoices, owner-related documents be stored in the cloud, or do we need to retain paper?
Well, I do not believe you need to retain paper, but I would not want to be the board members who store the documents in a system that crashes and loses all your official records. That's like saying, I don't want to be on the board when we decide to take all of our reserves and put them in a, decide to day trade with the money. I think you need to have your records stored. I don't think you still need to have all those file cabinets against the wall. I think that's Paleolithic. But I do believe that you need to figure out a way to store your records in multiple servers so that they are protected and they can't be wiped out by a software glitch or a hack or a power shortage or a storm or what have you.
Okay, and then Joanna Naples wants to know.
By the way, before we leave the last question, I also think it's high time that everybody has their records digitized. I think it's time that your records are digitized and organized in a way in a computer so that when owners want to see records, it's convenient for everybody, not just the owners, but also for the manager and for the board. Somebody says, I want to see the minutes of the last couple of years. You can either pull them and put them on the desktop in a file, or you can drag them into a file and email them to the owner and you're done. I think it's time to use technology to digitize the preservation, retrieval, and inspection of records.
KW's a big believer in that. We're a paperless world. We put everything out in the cloud so that and back it up so it's always available. Joanna Naples wanted to know, she had a bunch of questions in here. I'm going to try to ask a couple of them. Basically, in her community, she said they used to have monthly meetings. Now their meetings aren't as regular. Boards are still making decisions outside of board meetings. What should the boards really be doing to comply with state law, even though there's this pandemic going on and you might not meet as regularly?
We've spent a good portion of this call talking about the available technology. I do not believe the pandemic suddenly creates an excuse for the boards not to post notice and conduct open meetings. Matter of fact, it's easier to do now using the technology than it used to be. I don't think that the pandemic creates an excuse. There are certain things that the board can meet to discuss in private, but they are very limited.
All right, so we have some other questions. I'm not going to get to all of them, so I apologize for that. But I do want to ask each of you one last question. So, and I'll start with you, Robert. As we wrap up today's discussion, what have we learned in 2020 that we didn't think possible just 9 months ago?
What have we learned in 2020 that we didn't think possible just 9 months ago? I mean, I didn't think it was possible to completely shut down the economy and shut down the movement of people. I mean, to me, it's just what we've seen. I've actually learned a lot during this. Hopefully what I've learned improves myself and the company.
I would ditto exactly what you said. That's exactly the way I was going to answer the question. I would have never guessed that we could bring this economy to its knees and we would stop Americans from moving around. Just phenomenal. And by the way, we figured out how to continue to keep going and keep operating after we got over that initial shock. I don't think we need to. I was watching Bloomberg stuff earlier this morning, and they're talking about Germany shutting down for over a month now. Listen, I'm not, politics aside, I don't think we should shut down the economy. I think we should use our mask and practice proper social distancing, but we can't shut everything down.
All right, Ken, same question for you. What have we learned in 2020 that you didn't think was possible 9 months ago?
Well, this may be another way of saying the same thing that Robert and Steve have said, but you spend enough time, particularly in my profession, where you're paid to be a skeptic and a cynic, that you tend to lose faith in human nature. And I guess what I have seen is that there is a level of resilience in the fabric of our society that a lot of us thought might have been lost or diminished. And Robert is entirely correct. Look at the number of people who lost jobs. Look at the number of businesses that have shut down. But I have hope that we're going to come back. I have hope that we're already on our way back. And I have hope that as the pandemic wanes, civility will rise. And I think fortunes will rise as well.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. Today was a great conversation. You guys were all fantastic. We can all agree that 2020 posed new challenges for all of us personally and in community associations. With the vaccine now being distributed, we can be more optimistic that over the next 6 months, the spread of the virus will diminish. We can kind of get back to what we think is normal. Our sincere thanks to all of our listeners and registrants today. If you didn't get a chance to listen, we did record this webinar. You can watch the broadcast again or share it with a fellow board member. You can find it on our website at kwpmc.com, or you can also find it on our YouTube channel at KWPM. I want to sincerely thank our panelists, Ken Direktor with Becker, Steve Powell, the president of Ocean Club Community Association, and Robert White, co-founder and managing director of KW Property Management Consulting. We look forward to having you join us again for our Best Practices in Community Association webinar series on January 20th. From all of us at KW Property Management Consulting, thank you for making a difference in your communities, and remember to wear your masks, respect social distancing, wash your hands, stay healthy, and happy holidays, everyone. Bye for now.